Have you ever stared at a puzzle so ridiculously complex, so famously unsolvable, that you literally convinced yourself it had to be magic? Well, for over a century, the greatest cryptographers and historians out there have been throwing themselves at the voynich manuscript. It's that bizarre, heavily illustrated medieval book sitting at Yale University, designated MS 408. The vellum dates back to the early 15th century, but not a single word of its weird, flowing script has ever been cracked. People have called it an alien text, a masterful hoax, an absolute unbreakable cipher. But what if everyone's just been looking at it wrong? Let's completely reframe this.
Okay, what if I told you the absolute core key to unmasking this entire text is breathtakingly simple? For hundreds of years, scholars have been trying to read the page normally, top to bottom, assuming these strange glyphs were some insanely complex encrypted language. But recent analytical breakthroughs have shown us that it's not a mystical cipher at all. To unlock it, you literally just have to change your physical perspective. You just rotate the book 180 degrees. I know, right? When you turn it upside down, those alien shapes suddenly snap into this rigid structural logic. But before we get into what it actually says, we really need to talk about who wrote it. Enter Michael Scott. This guy was a brilliant 13th century polyglot and a wandering scholar who mastered Latin, Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew. He actually served at the court of Emperor Frederick II in the Kingdom of Sicily. Now, Scott was a phenomenal translator, but his sheer brainpower completely terrified the superstitious public of his time. Rumors spread like wildfire that he was a dark wizard. I mean, Dante even threw him into the inferno for his supposed magical frauds. But here's the thing. Michael Scott wasn't a demon. He was a scientist, a physician, and an alchemist running a lab in Toledo, Spain. And he's the true original author of this text we've been getting wrong for centuries.
So, with this upside-down perspective, we have to completely change how we think about this manuscript. It's not magical gibberish. It is the Johnson-Voynich Laboratory Manual. We're talking about a highly structured working apothecary guide outlining exact alchemical protocols. Scott wasn't casting spells. He was running a legit chemical laboratory to make highly refined medicinal extracts. And, absolutely crucial to Emperor Frederick's economy, he was purifying high-grade Augustalis gold coins. He needed to write down these technical processes, but he had to hide them from a terrified public and a highly suspicious church. And that is where that 180-degree rotation comes in. It's the ultimate master key. The second you flip it, those bizarre repeating symbols instantly transform into standard English apothecary measurements. For example, that symbol that kind of looks like an 8, that actually translates to drachm, which is a primary unit of wheat. The 4P shape, that's a scruple, used as a process valve or separator. And AAW means stasis, which is the specific chemical rest time needed in a process. These symbols aren't words, they're technical commands, literally just the chemical weights and measures of a working 13th century scientist. Let's actually apply this to some specific botanical folios to see how perfectly it works. Take folio 1V, which deals with nightshade. Now, nightshade is incredibly toxic. It's a heavy sedative and a poison. Because it's so dangerous, the manual specifically instructs you to measure it in tiny scruples, those 4P symbols, and it requires a triple stasis. That's written as 3 8W symbols in a row, meaning it needs a really long chemical rest time just to stabilize the poison. Now compare that to folio 2R, which covers ephedra. Ephedra is just a common stimulant, so the manual says to measure it in much larger drachms using the 8 symbol, and it only needs a single stasis. It's just exact, highly practical chemistry, hiding in plain sight. And this technical logic completely shatters the mystery of those famous zodiac folios. For years, everyone assumed those intricate star charts were mystical astrology. Nope. They're actually a really sophisticated heat equation. The stars equal thermal units. So, a really high density of stars in the summer sections, that just means you need maximum solar heat for the rapid soaking or maceration of common plants. A low star density in the winter sections means you need cooling, which is absolutely vital for that toxic triple stasis we just talked about. And get this, even those weird wavy lines drawn in the diagrams aren't just decorative. They represent high humidity. The instructions literally say that in high humidity, you have to add 1 extra scruple of raw material just to compensate for the atmosphere. All of this shows just how insanely precise Michael Scott was being. And that brings us to a massively important number hidden deep in the text, 1.16. This is the 1.16-bit entropy deficit. Think about it. In any chemical extraction, when you process raw materials, you're obviously going to lose some mass to evaporation and waste, right?
Well, Scott actually calculated that exact rate of physical loss, which explains one of the most famously bizarre parts of the whole manuscript. Remember those weird biological sections? The ones packed with drawings of naked figures bathing in these massive, complex networks of pipes and tubs? Yeah, those aren't magical rituals or crazy plumbing diagrams. That entire section is a visual mathematics equation. It's literally a flowchart calculating that exact 1.16 mass loss factor. The text tells the apothecary to subtract this 1.16 deficit, which Scott very poetically calls the gap in the breath, from the raw weight. Why? To figure out the exact safe final dosage. It's just a mathematical safety check to make sure the medicine actually heals the patient instead of, killing them.
Now, all this hidden science feeds directly into the wild physical history of the book itself, which is really the heart of this explainer. The manuscript sitting at Yale today, that is not Michael Scott's original 13th century document. It's actually the third reproduction. The original text kicked off a super dangerous provenance chain involving 5 different scribes. Why so many? Well, it stems from the whole narrative of the stolen copy. Basically, early editions were compromised, which forced these scribes into the intentional destruction of previous versions, just to keep this powerful alchemical knowledge out of the wrong hands. So each scribe copied the work, desperately preserving the secrets, but adding their own layers of obfuscation to protect it from a world that would happily burn them at the stake for doing science. And to protect this specific surviving reproduction from some truly deadly pursuers, namely the legendary and terrifying Order of the Hassasins, these 5 scribes used a genius piece of linguistic espionage. It's called the language paradox. Remember, Michael Scott was a polyglot. So the scribes took his knowledge of foreign alphabets and used foreign Arabic and runic character shapes, but purely as phonetic placeholders to spell out Old English sounds. It's like if you wrote the English word cat, but used a Greek delta symbol for the A. To anyone else, it looks like an unbreakable alien language. But if you know the secret, that the shapes are just sounds, it reads in English. Well, phonetic 13th century Old English, which honestly sounds a bit more like Old Norse or German, but you get the idea. So, to actually read what these scribes were hiding, you have to run it through what's known as the triple filter protocol. It's a totally mechanical 3-step process. First step, the mirror flip. You literally have to look at the text in a mirror. So a shape that looks like a backwards S on the vellum is just a normal S in the reflection. Second, the bottom-up sequence. You don't read it top to bottom. You actually start way down in the bottom right corner. And finally, the sound out. Once you're reading the flipped symbols upwards, you vocalize the phonetic Old English sounds. Run that protocol, and all the technical noise drops away, letting you access the deepest layer of the book. And here is where things pivot from a cool technical marvel into something incredibly emotional. If you apply that filter and systematically mute the commands, meaning you just ignore all the 8s and 4Ps, all those technical alchemical weights we talked about, the laboratory noise goes completely silent. And what you're left with, hidden right there in the phonetic Old English, is a deeply personal diary. It's woven straight into the fabric of this chemical manual. You are literally reading the secret, private thoughts of the wizard himself. When we do this, when we mute the chemical commands and translate that phonetic bridge into modern English, we get this absolutely profound confession. It reads, "Listen now, I am Michael, the one they call the wizard. I write this not for the kings who want my gold, but for the one who has the eyes to turn this page against the glass. They watch my laboratory with fear. I am a man of flesh, not a demon of the dark. He hid his actual humanity behind his laboratory weights. He knew greedy men would just skim it looking for gold recipes. But a kinder spirit, someone who understood the math and the mirrors, they would eventually find his true voice. He wasn't a monster. He was just a brilliant guy, completely terrified of the era he lived in." Honestly, it forces us to rethink our entire approach to history. The Voynich manuscript was never an alien language. It certainly wasn't a hoax. It was a perfectly logical, highly advanced scientific manual, carrying the desperate diary of a misunderstood genius. And it was all wrapped in a physical cipher that just required us to turn the page upside down and grab a mirror. So I leave you with this. If the most unbreakable, legendary code in human history was hiding in plain sight, entirely solvable with just a slight shift in perspective, what other impossible historical secrets are sitting in our archives right now, just waiting for us to look at them differently?